Professor Michael Eric Dyson, thank you so much for joining us on UpFront.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump has officially announced his bid to run for president in 2024. What do you make of this?
Well, this is the perfect storm of unmitigated narcissism meets political opportunism. It is certainly wrecking the potential fortunes of the Republican Party. I think they've rejiggered the whole contest and have settled on figures like, if not exclusively, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. He, after all, is the remix of Donald Trump, equally authoritarian, but with a panache and a style, a kind of a palatable autocracy, if you will, that Donald Trump simply doesn't have. He's more brutal, he's more blunt, and I think it's really forcing the Republican Party finally to come to grips with the effect of Trumpism. So the Republican Party is really going to have a come to Jesus moment because of his candidacy.
There's a quote from Trump's speech that people are repeating a lot. He said, anyone who truly seeks to take on this rigged and corrupt system will be faced with a storm of fire that only a few could understand. He's painting himself as the people's champion. Could that tone make him more palatable to the Republican base? Could that give him a second life in the American electoral mind?
Well, his base has proved in the past to be highly gullible, or at least desperate enough to believe that that kind of political rhetoric doesn't mask the kind of chicanery that we saw going on. In other words, here was a guy who said, I'm going to be for the average Joe. And when he got into office, it was a bunch of billionaires and multimillionaires who were running the show. Now, that happens in most administrations. That's not exclusive to Donald Trump. But when you claim to be the people's champ, and when you use that kind of populist language, then the deliverables have to be judged differently. So this is Donald Trump brilliantly seizing the moment, understanding what's at stake, reading the room, so to speak, and giving the folk what they want. Donald Trump knows all along that he can't deliver on what he promises, but he promises regardless, because that is part of the political theater of a Donald Trump. And it has not failed him so far, and it may indeed be successful this time around as well.
Well, as you alluded to a bit ago, the first sign of failure for Trump might be that the folks he backed weren't successful. So we can safely say, Trump supporters, or Trump-backed candidates rather, don't have the kind of gravitas and power that they had 4 years ago. What does that mean? Why?
Yeah, first of all, when you look at the coaching tree of Bill Belichick and you go, as great as he was, the folk that he put into the league ain't doing so well. So if we look at Donald Trump as Bill Belichick, since they've had some conversations.
And I'm going to note for my, because we got an international audience, that is a celebrated U.S. football coach of the New England Patriots.
That's right. Arguably the greatest of all time. Some have made that argument. So yes, a coach of football, forgive us for using that term in an international audience here. We know it's not football in the classic sense, but he's a guy who's a great coach. And the coaching tree, that is the people who coach under him and then go on to have their own teams, haven't necessarily done as well as the original figure. So Donald Trump is able to weave, this web of tremendous charisma and appeal. He was more successful the first time around, as you recognize, than, as you're pointing out, right now. And I think what it says is the spell is wearing off. The magic is dissipating for those who are referred political figures. But it may not indicate that Donald Trump has really spent his last bit of fortune here. His political capital is depleted, to be sure, but it's not completely wiped out. And if you can say anything about Donald Trump, it's the ability to reinvent himself.
The supporters of Trump, the people who are diehard, the people who still to this day say Trump is our president, do they see the red wave or the non-red wave that happened and say, you know what, it's time for us to come out and assemble again? Will this galvanize and draw out his supporters? Or is this evidence that he doesn't have as much support as we thought?
No, I think it's the former and not the latter. I think, look, those people are so diehard in their commitment to Donald Trump, to death do us part. And then they want to get married after they go to heaven, so to speak, and in the afterlife. And Donald Trump is experiencing a kind of political afterlife, right? He was president. He lost. That's a political death for most presidents, but maybe not for Donald Trump, because his base is so deeply committed to him that no matter what happens, the people who disagree with him are read as counterfeit. And I do believe that Donald Trump, surprisingly, perhaps to the chagrin of many, still maintains a powerful hold on the bread and butter Republican, not necessarily the elites who were disingenuous to begin with. They knew Donald Trump was lying. They knew he was full of tricks and bad faith. They knew that he was doing stuff that was really antithetical to the Constitution and certain rule of law, but they went along with it because it was the best way to ride his coattails. Now that they've tried to get off and cut those coattails and seize on to someone else, I think the bread and butter Republican has not yet given up on Donald Trump.
Earlier, you talked about Ron DeSantis as a potential heir apparent to Donald Trump. Some say they're similar. Some have said that he's more polished. We had one guest once say he's Donald Trump who can read. You know, there are lots of different ways to think about DeSantis, but one thing that connects him, to be sure, to Trump is the idea of right-wing populism.
Right.
If we see the shift away from Trump, have we simply paved the way, not for a more mainstream political candidate or a return to the so-called status quo, but simply opening the door to another right-wing populist, perhaps potentially more polished, like a DeSantis or other folk?
Yeah, you know, I'm an old Baptist preacher. And there's a scripture that says, when you cast out the demon, if you don't put something else in its place, 7 worse demons than the first one are going to come occupy that space. And Donald Trump did create a kind of Donald Trump-sized vacuum. I do believe that those, out loud thoughts about Ron DeSantis are true. He's more polished, which means he's more sophisticated about his chicanery. He's more sophisticated about his autocracy. He's more sophisticated about his fascist impulses, but he embraces the explicit language that ties him to Donald Trump's, if you will, most fervent supporters. But he understands that the methodology has to adhere and conform to traditional conceptions of law and order. And that may be indeed where he has a leg up on Donald Trump for those who want to distance themselves from Donald Trump because they know he's wrecking the machine, but they want to embrace Ron DeSantis because he brings the spirit of Donald Trump to bear.
What role does the media play in all this? I can't help but think that there's a way that in covering his announcement so extensively, we are aiding his bid. We devote so much attention to his every move. Are we supporting his candidacy? And I'm being self-critical as well. We're here doing it right at this very moment, right? There's a way that we have been obsessed with Donald Trump since 2016. And in doing so, we've given him unearned media, unearned advertising. He's getting free publicity every day. Are we repeating the same mistake of 2016 by giving Trump so much time?
Yeah, it's the paradox, right? Because if you don't cover it, then you're left out in the competition for the resource of attention. And if you do cover it, you're just adding on and giving him a kind of, gravitas, a kind of legitimacy that otherwise he wouldn't have. You know how in hip hop culture, they have that FOMO, feeling of missing out? Well, Donald Trump has the photo, feeling of trumped out. Because on the one hand, if you don't Trump in, then you're not like, what? You didn't hear him? You didn't listen to what he said? You didn't pay attention to his body language? You didn't talk about, right? We've all become Trump deconstructionists. We're out here trying to figure out what the heck Donald Trump is about, what he's saying. Did you see his left eye twitch? Did you notice that his hair was pushed to the right further, right? We're doing all this Trump analysis. And the reality is, yes, he is the creature of the media, but he's been the master of the media. And having mastered the media in reality television, he understands how to push the envelope and to push the right buttons to get the media to pay attention.
There has been a surge in white nationalism during Trump's presidency. We saw an increase in election denialism. We've seen the January 6th insurrection. We've seen a 55% increase in the number of white nationalist hate groups during the Trump era. That's according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. When we think about Trump running for president again, do we have any reason not to expect a similar surge?
No. In fact, the opposite is true. it can be predicted with reasonable confidence that a similar surge will occur. That, when you're trying to catch one of these Lyfts or Ubers and you're dealing with the surge, and during the surge you pay more, that's what we pay more. We pay more during the surges of Trump and white nationalism. We pay in terms of political capital that's precious to us. We pay in terms of lives lost. We pay in terms of an erosion of the American spirit. We pay in the refusal to acknowledge that white supremacy is the ultimate arbiter of truth in our political scene. What January 6th proved to us is that people were willing to be hypocrites, and when you told them they were hypocrites, they didn't even care. You say you like, blue lives matter. And yet the police were easily disposable that day. They were seen to be enemies, right? This is a people who said that they were committed to America, and yet they were dragging through the halls of Congress, the most vaunted symbol of American democracy, a banner of betrayal called the Confederate flag. They don't care. Wait a minute. I thought you loved the police, but you're beating them up. I thought you were concerned about real democracy, but you're waving a flag that is the ultimate sign of betrayal to America.
Doc, when you see all of that, before we go, when you see all of that, is there any reason to be hopeful for the future of American democracy if Trump is able to reemerge, even at this stage, as a legitimate political figure?
Yeah, here's the hope. Now, it's a negative hope, so to speak. But, if Donald Trump is reelected, that has got to say something to the folk who don't support him. And look, as many people as there are that support him, there are millions more who don't. There will no longer just be Donald Trump, because what will have been revealed is that there's something roiling beneath the surface that is fundamentally in opposition to us as human beings. That's what's going to happen. That could happen. And to finish my thought about what happened on January 6th, the real religion, the real politics, the real force of society, the real democracy is whiteness. A particularly virulent, narrowly focused, narcissistic whiteness is the real basis of what America is about. The great philosopher Beyonce Giselle Knowles said, when giving an award to the ex-football quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, said that it has been said that American racism is so deeply entrenched in the country that it's identified with America itself. So that when you challenge racism, it looks as if you're challenging America. So many more people will come to grips with the fact that this is not simply about Donald Trump. This is about a way of life that we have embraced. And I think the fall will be precipitous, and I think the revelation will be thundering. But we have to continue to really gnaw away at that resistance. That's the only choice we have, because if they can win that battle of the will, and they can make us believe there is nothing we can do about it, they will have won the ultimate prize, which is the conversion of us into a kind of hopeless knot of voters who don't even use what we have at our disposal, a lever to make a difference in this democracy.
Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, thank you so much for joining us on UpFront.
Thanks for having me, my friend.